One of the important stories documented in this scroll is when he was arrested in Vienna. He was among other communal leaders who were responsible for collecting a tax on the Jewish community to help support the 30 Years' War. And there were those in the community who not only did not want to pay the tax, but were quite frustrated about the need for the tax. And so they went to the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II, and they said, this gentleman is, he has contempt of the state and has insulted Christianity. And that was, of course, a terrible accusation. He was jailed. He was initially supposed to be killed. He was jailed on June 15th, 1629, and remained in jail for 30 years. He was initially, like I said, supposed to receive a death penalty, but his sentence was commuted so that ultimately his punishment was that he was not allowed to become the rabbi in Prague, but he could go elsewhere, and he ultimately went to Poland. What's fascinating about this particular scroll, also written on parchment and with a very book-like colophon at the end of the first part. A colophon is a text that describes how and when a book was written. So he's sort of retaining a book that is a codex, bound volume concepts within his scroll, but he is writing it as a scroll, again, to emphasize the importance of this particular event. And even to the present day, those who are descendants of this rabbi celebrate the day of his release from prison on the 5th of Tammuz, of the Hebrew month of Tammuz, as a holiday, because they're continuing to remember that legacy. And you can see it's not clear when this particular scroll was written, but it was that important that his family felt that it needed to be written in something that was a little bit more important. It's something that seemed much more momentous, I guess, than an actual book. And so it was written on parchment in a scroll in this way. So that is scroll number 2. And this actually also came to Columbia from Professor Gatheil. The next scroll that we have, I'm actually going to start at the end. I'm going to turn it sideways for a moment, just the camera, just so that you can see what this looks like, because it's really quite an amazing scroll with these wooden handles. It's quite large. And this is a scroll that tells the story of, and I'll say it in Hebrew and then I'll translate it. I can find here. שמועות הנוגעות למציאות היהודים לבנים ושחורים שבארץ מלבר וקודשים. So these are the rumors and the things that happened to regarding the community of the Black and white Jews that live in the lands of Malabar and Cochin. So this particular scroll was about the Jews of India. And there were two communities in India. There were the so-called white Jews and the so-called Black Jews. The white Jews were emigres from farther west. And the so-called Black Jews were the native Indian Jews who had been there for millennia. And the reason I start at the end is because I want to show you this listing, which actually goes through the cities within India. And I'm not able to pronounce correctly all of them, so I'll just point out Cochin at the front, at the top. And the first column is Batei Knasiot, so those are synagogues, and Batei Moshavim, households. So he actually made a count of how many Jews there were, how many synagogues in each city. In the case of Cochin, there are 3 synagogues and 150 households. And then adds it all up. So he's really doing not only a history of the Jews there, but an actual accounting of their community. I'm going to roll a bit because as I was scrolling toward the end, I noticed something very interesting, which is this line. Now, I am no expert in Indian languages, and I certainly don't claim to be. But here they're talking about the king of Cochin, and the author, Yahya ben Avraham Alevi Saraf, who was originally, I'm sorry, he wasn't. Shows the signature of the king of Cochin, and that is certainly not Hebrew. I would love to hear from somebody who has more expertise than I in Indian languages to see if that is actually a readable signature. This scroll was produced in 1781. Interestingly, we actually have a 17th century manuscript, which is written like a codex, not like a scroll, and so I didn't bring it down for you today, by Moses Pereira de Paiva, which is written in Spanish, and that describes a visit by the author himself to the Jewish community of Cochin. That manuscript was published in Portuguese in Amsterdam in 1678, and in Spanish in Amsterdam in 1687. He went to visit. He was a Dutch Jew who went to visit India and the Indian Jewish communities in November of 1686. And actually, there was a lot of back and forth with the community where they gave him manuscripts to be printed at the famous Krups press in Amsterdam, which was one of the most important presses during that time. And he went ahead and printed those books for that community. The scroll that we're looking at by Yahya ben Avraham Sarah Halevi of Baghdad is based on Yosef Halegua's Kutanat Yosef. Yosef Halegua was the son-in-law of Yecheskel Rechavi, who was a leader in the Jewish community of Malabar and died in 1771. So this is very interesting that it's written on parchment, especially because in a scroll format, especially because we know of other texts that are written on paper and in book format. But clearly, this is an example of hearkening back to showing this very old community, this very ancient community that had been in India for so many centuries. And so writing their history in a scroll was in a way showing just how old and important this particular community was. This scroll came to us as part of a number of scrolls, mostly Esther scrolls among the Hebrew scrolls, by George Clinton, who was a Columbia professor, and this arrived to Columbia in 1936. Our final scroll goes the other way. And everything I have to say about this scroll is indebted to Professor Dr. Yosef Hayes, who gave a wonderful talk about his work on this scroll and has published quite a bit on this Ilan as part of his work of kabbalistic Ilanot, or tree scrolls. So an Ilan is a long scroll rather than unlike all the other scrolls we've seen so far, which have which goes up and down instead of horizontally, and it's used. It has a lot of uses. Its original use has been meditative. So for kabbalistic meditative purposes, those who were well versed in Kabbalah would read through it actually from top to bottom. This is from bottom to top because it has been rolled. The last time it was rolled with the bottom at the bottom. And I want you to just watch as I roll it. There's almost it's very user heavy In order to roll it, there's a lot of work that has to go. You need both hands to roll it. Even if you're using it for reading, you're still using both hands. You have to hold it open. It's not going to stay open by itself. And you just have to sort of go through the entire thing. This has kabbalistic names, various diagrams, kabbalistic diagrams, and was probably produced in Morocco in the 18th century. What's particularly interesting about this particular Ilan is that while Ilanot are usually used by kabbalistic experts to study Kabbalah and to review various meditative passages, the very end of this Ilan includes, and I'm quoting from Yossi Chayes here, a prayerful dedication to the intended carrier of this rather substantial parchment scroll, nearly 4 meters in length. And this actually has a dedication to the owner, a woman, and I'll shout out to International Women's Day. And the woman's name was Nasma Bat Hana, a woman who likely lived in 19th century Morocco. So what happened with this scroll, and what's particularly interesting, as Professor Chayes has shown, is that this was a scroll that was created initially as a document for experts, for knowledgeable people, and indeed the top of the Ilan is all in male, assuming that the pronouns are all male, assuming that the readers would be male. And it's not until the very end, till that dedication, where the pronouns suddenly switch to a woman for this Nasma Bat Hana. And some of Professor Chayes' writing, I think speaks so much to why we have scrolls that are non-biblical within a Jewish context. And he writes about the importance of the material form and how the materiality of the object is what affected the meaning. So just reading something in a book, turning its pages, it is in itself an act, a conscious act, but having to go through like this, like as I'm doing, somewhat awkwardly, is much more of a focused, action. And he writes about how important the material process of using this particular object was, which we see again from just, hopefully you see from the way that I am scrolling through it myself. So again, Kabbalists might study or contemplate an Ilan, but the buyer of this particular, what he calls an Ilan amulet, wore it rolled up in a silver case. So our friend Nasma would have kept this upon her person as a protection against demons, against various negative forces that may have come upon her. So you have in this one document very sort of the whole history of Kabbalistic uses of materials, both for study and for somebody who might have no idea what was inside it, but used it for more ritual purposes. And that is it for me. So I'm going to take this scroll and I'm going to turn back to my camera so you can see me again.